Hi, this is Billy Brown. I'm a nature writer for Grid Magazine, for PhillyNature.org, and I am here at the Cobbs Creek Environmental Center with site director Tony Croasdale.
Hello, Billy.
Hello, Tony. Tony is one of my best friends. Tony is, I'll say, my primary birding mentor, and my partner in many endeavors, including the Urban Wildlife podcast that we co-host. And so we're here talking about spring migration. So spring migration for birds and for people who love birds, spring migration is one of the most exciting times of the year. And so, Tony, what is spring migration? We're talking about it. What are we talking about?
Generally speaking, it's a northbound movement of birds from their wintering grounds to their summering grounds, and at least in our hemisphere. It basically starts in February with some species and goes through June. But the peak is about the first 2 weeks of May. And
so this video will come out a little bit past the peak, but with, I think, plenty of migration to observe and to enjoy. Hey, why do birds migrate? What's the point of it?
Different species migrate for different reasons, but generally the birds' feathers are really, really good insulators, so that it's not actually that they can't take the cold. They need fuel to fuel their furnaces, and if a bird specializes in a food source that is not available in the cold, then they're going to have to move, right? Generally, it's insect-eating birds that have wintered in the tropics and are now moving north. But it could be that we are not that far removed from the ice age, and it could literally be that these birds evolved as the ice was retreating and their habitat moved up, so they're just kind of returning back to where they came from.
And we talk a lot about where birds are migrating to. We were looking a little earlier at a couple birds that were in the tree above us, a Magnolia Warbler and a black pole warbler. Warblers are a group of birds that are sort of like some of the gems of the bird world. A lot of them are really beautiful, and a lot of them migrate long distances. And so the black pole warbler in particular, it is not the most flashy of warblers. The Magnolia is. That one's got like a yellow belly, kind of black necklace and black streaking and a black mask. It's just a really hot little bird. And then the black pole, a little plainer, but the black pole has one of the longest migrations of any animal on the planet. They breed and they build their nests in the northern lower 48, so like New England and maybe like upstate New York and stuff. And then you think of like a big swath of the continent to the west all the way to like Alaska.
They'll nest in like stunted spruce and willows that are like less than knee high in tundra.
And you've seen this because you've done field work up in the tundra. Yeah. The ones from Alaska, how do they migrate?
All the black pole warblers migrate through the East Coast. Even if they breed in like central Alaska, they still migrate through the East Coast because that's probably how they evolved. Boreal forest and tundra edge being exposed by the glaciers, they probably moved that way. Right. And so they never learned to just cut down the coast, the Pacific coast. They just go back to the traditional way, which is all the way through eastern Canada and south.
And so this is part of one of the great things about Philadelphia for birding and spring migration is that we sit on something called the Atlantic Flyway. When you think of how birds fly north and south, they follow a lot of times coastlines. So the Atlantic coastline is one of these, almost like a bird superhighway where tons of birds are coming up the Atlantic coast and then they cut into Canada from there. It puts us in a great position to see them. And so a lot of these smaller birds, they're migrating at night. They might fly 100, 200 miles a night, and then in the daytime, they're going to touch down in a park, a green space like this, and then they're going to look for bugs to refuel so they can do the next leg of couple hundred miles the next night or in a couple nights. And so we are in a great place for this, Cobbs Creek. It's one of our creek corridor parks in Philadelphia, a lot of green, but I also bird a lot just near where I live, for example. I live in West Philly, in very ordinary Philadelphia, row houses, twins, apartment blocks. And we've got a park called Malcolm X Park at 52nd and Pine that is just like 2 blocks by 2 blocks. It's got some really tall trees. It's got a playground. It's got, grass to hang out on. We go there a lot with our family just to hang out and go to the playground. But we've seen 61 species of birds in there. And in spring migration, these are sometimes called migrant traps, in that they are choice little bits of green that birds flying by are going to be like, ooh, I'm going to stop in there, and I'm going to eat as many bugs as I can before I do the next flight. So wherever you are in Philadelphia, you should come to an environmental center like this. You should come to our big parks. But if what you've got time for is to walk somewhere 5 minutes from your house, do it. You still might see a lot of really neat birds wherever you are in Philadelphia during the spring and the fall during these migration times.
And oftentimes it's much easier. Migrating at night, dawn hits, and they're over Philadelphia and they need to put down. If they're over West Philly, they might hit a couple dozen acres of Malcolm X Park or Clark Park and Woodland Cemetery. It'd be a lot easier to see and a lot denser.
And so you can be standing there and you just got like bird after bird after bird coming through the trees. I also like to point out for spring migration, a lot of our birds that are here during the summer are showing up, and that's exciting too. We were looking at a Baltimore Oriole, for example. This is another bird that spends its winters in the neotropics, like
Central
America, and then comes back up here to build its nests, which are these fun hanging bags of like grass that they knit together. And then they like to nest near water, so this is a great spot. And they're a beautiful bird that comes back this time of year and that we get to enjoy all summer. And I'm going to expand on this for a second to say that this shows how the wildlife that we enjoy, the nature we enjoy in our city right here that feels like a bubble sometimes, is connected to ecosystems all over the planet. So just here in this creek, we're seeing birds that hang out for the winter in South America and Central America. We've seen at least one bird that might be on its way to Alaska right now. They're spending time, important critical time in their yearly cycles here in Philadelphia. And so when we look at things we can do for birds, I always put in some of these conservation tips. We can do things like plant native plants. How does that help birds?
So insects, obviously they're quite small.
Yes,
and they cannot ingest too much toxin. So plants all put toxin in their leaves to prevent them from being eaten, right? If you're really small, you have to evolve to be able to eat the plants in your area because you don't really have the capacity to be able to overcome the toxins in a variety of plants. And so if you bring a plant in from Europe, for instance, the insects here aren't going to able to eat that leaf tissue, and the amount of insects will be less. Studies have shown, including my graduate research and many others, especially Doug Ptolemy down in Delaware in his lab, that native plants host way more species of insects. So a lot of times people plant like butterfly bush, which is not native and it has flowers, and lots of things can take in nectar because it's designed to get their genetic material spread. But the leaves that actually support the caterpillars, if it's not a native, they can't eat that, and therefore they're not going to be able to reproduce.
And so supporting our native bugs is a way of supporting our birds. Other things you can do, a lot of times birds will fly into windows. We had a whole video about this. Bird Safe Philly is an effort here in Philadelphia that is working to do a few things to reduce the number of bird window collisions. Birds smack into windows in a nutshell because they reflect stuff that they want to land in. So they'll see a tree reflected in a window, or they'll want to fly through a window to something on the other side. So if you do things to make a window visible, the bird won't fly into it. Also, birds that are migrating at night get confused by artificial lights at night, like at skyscrapers. So part of Bird Safe Philly is this lights out program to try to get skyscrapers to turn their lights down at night so we don't confuse the birds as much. Also, for looking at this for your own house, check out the American Bird Conservancy. They got some great resources on that. And as I always say when it comes to birds, it's a good idea to keep your cats inside. Tony, you're a cat person, aren't you?
I am indeed. I adopted one from here.
There you go. And so Tony keeps his cats inside. It's not just good for the birds, it's also good for the cats. And so with that, I want to thank Tony as site director, and I want to, of course, thank our wonderful park system for having great places like this for us to shoot videos in and talk about nature and experience nature. We want to thank the William Penn Foundation for supporting these videos. And of course, if you want to learn more about nature in Philadelphia, check out phillynature.org. Of course, subscribe to Grid Magazine to support environmental journalism right here in Philadelphia. And if we're here talking together, we should say you should tune into the Urban Wildlife Podcast, where we talk about bird migration and a whole bunch of other topics. Thanks a lot.
Cheers. And please come visit me at Cobbs Creek Environmental Center, which I think is the perfect blend of large park and migrant trap.